Opening logo with a bird and a fish. Pan of a riverbank. Pan of a gravel bar. Image of a gravel bar with the sun shining brightly. Still of a riverbank with a driftwood log. A dirt riverbank. Yukon Flats National Wildlife Refuge, sustaining the wildness of Alaska's largest boreal wetland basin. As Heather Bartlett speaks, videos and images shown include map of Alaska wildlife refuges, map of the Yukon Flats National Wildlife Refuge, aerial landscape image of lakes on the Yukon Flats, aerial landscape image of fire burning on the Yukon Flats.
The Yukon Flats National Wildlife Refuge is a refuge in Alaska. It's the third largest refuge in the National Wildlife Refuge system. North of Fairbanks, it's a vast ecosystem of wetlands. What drives this refuge are natural forces of fire, ice, and water.
The Yukon Flats has got a really interesting history.
Mark Bertram, wildlife biologist. As he speaks, videos and images include map of rampart on the Yukon River, image of a dam on the Yukon River, lithograph of a man on a dog sled, image of salmon drying on a pole, image of a duck with ducklings in a water body, image of ducks in a duck trap on a lake, image of a man in a lake with a duck trap with ducks, map of recovered waterfowl bands from birds banded on the Yukon Flats Refuge, historic aerial image of the Yukon Flats, image of two ducks flying, image of a front cover reading Yukon Flats National Wildlife Refuge, a proposal, image of a man paddling down a river in an inflatable raft.
Back in the late 50s, early 1960s, there was a proposal to dam the Yukon River down by Rampart, which is downstream of the Yukon Flats. And it was a hydroelectric proposal. And so in order to assess the merits of that proposal, people got together because they were a little bit concerned about what the impacts might be on the Yukon Flats, the habitat, and all the people living within the Yukon Flats Refuge. There's quite a few people living within the refuge. We have 7 villages. So in order to figure out how special the Yukon Flats was, the Fish and Wildlife Service banded over 40,000 ducks within the Yukon Flats. And using the band return information, they found out that those ducks were using 45 of the 50 lower 48 states. They were using 7 foreign countries, and they were using most of the provinces over in Canada, as well as all the major flyways down in the lower 48. And so that identified that the Yukon Flats was a special breeding area, and that information, along with a lot of other public information that was gathered during that whole process, really ensured that the dam never did go in, and thus the habitat was preserved.
So what that did
Heather Bartlett, wildlife refuge specialist.
is it really highlighted the national importance of this area and how important conserving this particular area is for conserving many other natural areas in the lower 48 and even across the continent.
A seagull flying. A sun setting over a river. Water flowing onto a gravel riverbank. Pan of a river with foothills in the background. A seagull on a gravel riverbank.
It's important to protect the Yukon Flats Refuge because we have responsibility towards our future generations.
Delia Vargas Krutzinger, wildlife biologist. As she speaks, videos and images shown include a riverbank with water moving quickly, tall vegetation moving in the wind.
To leave land protected in the state that it is now. The Yukon Flats is a wild place. The ecosystem is intact and functioning, and you can't find that very many places in the rest of the U.S.
The Yukon Flats Refuge is among the most important places for ducks. So each spring...
Bryce Lake, wildlife biologist. As he began to speak, an image of a bird flying and an image of a loon coming out of the water were shown. As he continues, Images shown include an image of a yellow-legged shorebird on a piece of driftwood, an image of 2 swans flying, an image of 2 ducks in a lake, an image of a duck with 6 ducklings in a lake.
Millions of ducks, and in addition to shorebirds and geese, raptors and loons, they all fly to the refuge to nest and rear their young. And the reason they are attracted to this area is because it has really enriched wetlands. There are lots of nutrients in the wetlands that provide a lot of food for the growing young.
We also have a lot of predator, prey species.
As Mark Bertram talks, behind him are an image of a bear, an image of a moose standing in tall grass, an image of a mink, an image of a duck in a lake with reeds behind it.
Like bears and black bears, grizzly bears, wolves. We also have a lot of moose and fur bearers that use the refuge. So overall, there's just a great diversity of both upland, lowland, and migratory bird species that use the refuge.
Most people know the flats as a duck nursery.
Aaron Martin, fisheries biologist. As he speaks, behind him are a shot of small fish swimming underwater, a shot of fish breaking the surface of the water, an image of a man holding a salmon in a boat, an image of a man laying fish on a table, an image of a fish wheel.
And that was one of the main purposes that was designed for, but a lot of recent research over the last decade has really illustrated how important it is to a variety of native endemic fish species for subsistence and recreational and commercial fisheries throughout the entire Yukon River Basin and out to supporting commercial fisheries out to the Bering Sea as well. So it supports a variety of different whitefish and salmon species, the northern pike, a little bit of everything that people rely on as cultural identities, but also for subsistence resources and where people go to recreate and enjoy being outside.
A shot of a riverbank. A seagull standing on a fallen tree in a river. 2 Arctic terns flying.
The type of recreation that you're going to find on Yukon Flats Refuge is very primitive.
As Heather Bartlett speaks, videos and images include a pan of 3 people and 3 kayaks on a riverbank, a woman sitting in a kayak on a river, 2 women looking at a map while eating, a woman paddling in a kayak on a river, GoPro footage of someone paddling a kayak on a river.
And what that often does is it gives people a complete break from some of the stresses of today's world. There are no cell phone towers out there. There are no roads. There are no trails. So any type of recreation that people have is entirely natural. The lands and waters within the Yukon Flats National Wildlife Refuge are open to the public to enjoy. And that's a really important tenet upon which the United States is built.
A sandy riverbank. River water moving as the sun sets. To learn more about the Yukon Flats National Wildlife Refuge, visit www.fws.gov/refuge/Yukon_flats or facebook.com/Yukon Flats National Wildlife Refuge. Video produced by Ian McDermod. Music by Jason Shaw at audioautics.com, licensed under Creative Commons 3.0. Photography by Darwin Syme, Adam Grimm, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, with special thanks to Heather Bartlett, Nathan Hockeluck, Mark Bertram, Bryce Lake, Delia Vargas Kretzinger, Aaron Martin, Brian Smith, Rebecca Erdman, Marianne Ramos, Samantha Kolarczyk.